I need you to picture the scene. A Sunday afternoon in Siriliri. A dining table crowded with family. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people who have known each other long enough to have opinions about everything. Jollof rice cooling in a pot in the kitchen. Photographs of a man who died years ago arranged on a sideboard. And in the center of that table, an envelope. My mother-in-law placed it there herself. She wore deep purple, her late husband's favorite color, and she carried herself the way she always did, like a woman arriving at a conclusion she had been building toward for a long time. She looked across the table at me, and she smiled. "I think," she said, "that it is time we settled something as a family." She had been waiting 3 years for this moment. 3 years of whispers, insinuations, phone calls to aunts, and pointed silences at Sunday dinners. 3 years of telling anyone who would listen that I was not to be trusted, that my son was not her son's son, that I had trapped him, tricked him, stolen him from the life he was supposed to live. She thought the envelope was a weapon. She thought she was finally going to end me right there in front of everyone with a certified lab report and a room full of witnesses. What she didn't know was that she had spent 3 years building toward the worst mistake of her life, and I was holding it in my hands. Her name was Mama Chidema. That's what everyone called her, not because it was her formal title, but because she had earned it the way powerful women earn names in Lagos, through sheer accumulated force of personality. I first met her on a Sunday afternoon in Lekki. My husband, Kelechi, had been nervous the entire drive there. He kept adjusting his collar, glancing at me, looking back at the road. I thought he was anxious about introducing me to his mother. I didn't understand yet that he wasn't nervous about the introduction. He was nervous about what she would do. She opened the door and looked at me the way customs officers look at suspicious luggage, not with hostility exactly, but with the peculiar attention of someone whose job is to find what you are hiding. "So, this is the one," she said. Not a question, a verdict. She was a tall woman, Yoruba, not Igbo like Kelechi's late father, a fact that mattered to her more than she would ever say out loud. She had a face that once was striking and still was in certain light. She wore her age like a woman who had fought for every year of it and wasn't going to apologize for it. I smiled. I introduced myself. Adana Ose Bonsu, a name that carries both my Igbo mother and my Ghanaian father. And she repeated it back to me slowly, the way you taste something you aren't sure about. Ose Bonsu. A pause. Where does that come from? My father's side. He was from Accra. 1 syllable. That was all she gave me. But inside that 1 syllable lived an entire philosophy of who was and who was not worthy of her son. Kelechi was her only child. She had poured everything into him. Her ambitions, her sacrifices, the peculiar loneliness of a woman who had outlived her husband and refused to let it break her. He was her masterpiece, and I, apparently, was a smudge on the canvas. I filed that syllable away. I would think about it many times in the years that followed. We got married 8 months later at the registry office in Victoria Island. Mama Chidema sat in the front row in grey asoke and said nothing when the officiator asked if anyone had objections, but her silence was louder than any objection could have been. 3 months after that, I found out I was pregnant, and everything got worse. My son Obina was born on a Wednesday in April. He came into the world loud and furious, his tiny fists already clenched, like he knew from the first breath that this life was going to require fighting for. Kelechi cried when he held him. I had never seen him cry before, and in that moment I loved my husband so completely that I thought, surely, nothing could touch what we had. But Mama Chidima stood at the foot of the hospital bed and looked at Obina the way she had looked at me at that first meeting, measuring, suspicious. Obina was a light-skinned baby, lighter than Kelechi, lighter than me, In a family of darker-toned people, that kind of complexion raises eyebrows without anyone saying a word. And Mama Chidima had many words. She just didn't say them to my face. She started with whispers. Whispers to Kelechi's aunts, whispers to neighbors, the kind of whispers that somehow always find their way back to the person they are about. That child doesn't look like my son. That girl trapped him. You know how these desperate women are. I'm not saying it's not his. I'm just saying someone should look into it. The first time Kelechi confronted her, she wept, said she only wanted what was best for him, said she was just asking the questions any mother would ask, said that if I had nothing to hide, why was I so upset? I learned something about Mama Chidima that day that I have never forgotten. She was masterful. She never attacked directly. She planted seeds and stepped back and watched them grow. And then if you confronted her about the harvest, she would look at you with wounded eyes and ask what seeds you were talking about. And for 3 years, I watched those seeds grow inside my marriage. I smiled at her when she visited. I served her food with both hands. I greeted her with the respect a woman of her standing expects. And every time something rose in my throat, every response, every correction, every quiet scream of enough, I swallowed it back down. Because Kelechi loved her, and I loved Kelechi, and I told myself that was sufficient. It was not sufficient, but I didn't know yet how to name what it was costing me. It was the anniversary of Kelechi's father's death. The family gathered at his uncle Babatunde's house in Surulere the way they did every year. Jollof rice and old photographs, and the particular kind of grief that becomes ritual after enough time has passed. I sat beside Kelechi. Obina, 3 years old now, was on my lap, eating chin-chin with both hands and dropping crumbs on my blouse. Everything felt ordinary, almost peaceful. Then Mama Chidima walked in. She wore deep purple, his father's favorite color, worn like a statement. She moved through the room greeting everyone, hugs, prayers, her voice warm and generous, the picture of a devoted matriarch. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. Then she sat at the head of the dining table and she placed an envelope in front of her. The room didn't go quiet all at once. It happened the way silence always happens in rooms where something is about to shift. A conversation trailed off here, a laugh died there, and then suddenly you realized everyone was watching the same thing. She looked across the table at me and she smiled. I think it's time, she said, that we settled something as a family. She pushed the envelope toward the center of the table. I had a DNA test done, properly, through a certified lab in Lagos. She looked at Obina, then at Kelechi, then at me. I want us to know once and for all whether this child is my son's son. The silence that followed was the kind that changes rooms permanently. Uncle Babatunde shifted in his seat. One of the aunts pressed her lips together. Someone coughed. The sound of a generator hummed somewhere outside. Kelechi's hand found mine under the table and held it. Mama, let me finish. Calm, absolute. I am not attacking anyone. I am a mother. I have a right to know the truth about my grandchild. If Adana is as faithful as she claims, she should have no problem with this. She slid the envelope toward me. Every eye in that room was on my face. I could feel them counting my heartbeats, reading my guilt or innocence in the way I breathed. I looked at Kelechi. He looked back at me, and I saw something I had not expected. Not doubt, fury. He was furious, not at me, at her. I reached across the table and picked up the envelope. The results were already inside. She hadn't waited for consent. I found out later she had collected Obina's hair from his brush during a visit and gotten a cheek swab from Kelechi without his knowledge, disguised as a health screening she had arranged. I opened it. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. Kelechi was Obina's father. Of course he was. I slid the paper across the table without a word. Let the room read it. Let the aunts murmur. Let Babatunde nod slowly, relieved. Mama Chidima picked it up, read it. Her smile didn't disappear exactly. It just recalibrated the way a chess player recalibrates after a move that didn't land the way they planned. Well, good, she said. And that should have been the end of it. That should have been the moment she looked across that table and found some fragment of apology inside her. But I was still holding the envelope because there was something else inside. Before I tell you what was on the second page, if you have ever been blamed for something you didn't do, drop a comment below. I want to hear from you. And if you are new here, please subscribe. You are going to want to see how this ends. A second sheet, smaller, clipped to the back of the first. I almost missed it. My fingers found it by accident as I was folding the paternity results away. A supplementary report, the kind that labs attach when their systems flag something unexpected. Clinical language, cold and precise the way lab documents always are. But the meaning was not clinical at all. In processing the DNA samples and running standard cross-referencing, the lab had detected something. Kelechi's biological profile contained markers consistent with a half-sibling relationship with a third individual. The lab noted this because their system had matched it against a profile already in their database from a separate test run 18 months earlier for a man named Rotimi Adeyemi Koka. I didn't know that name. I looked up from the paper. No one at the table seemed to recognize it either, except one person. Mama Chidima had gone very still. Not the stillness of calm, the stillness of someone who has just stepped on ice and is calculating how much weight it can hold before it breaks. Babatunde reached across and took the paper from me, squinting at it. What does this mean, half-sibling? It means, I said carefully, that according to this lab, Kelechi shares a biological parent with someone named Rotimi Adeyemi Koka. The room turned to look at Mama Chidima. She was staring at the tablecloth. Mama, Kelechi's voice had changed. It was low now, precise, the voice of a man choosing his words the way you choose your footing on unstable ground. Who is Rotimi Adeyemi Koka? The silence that followed was different from the earlier one. That silence was about me. This one was about her. Outside, a child somewhere in the compound laughed at something. The sound floated in and died. She's nobody, she said, barely audible. A mistake. A mistake, Kelechi repeated. Who shares my DNA? She looked up, and I saw it, the thing she had kept buried for more than 30 years. Not quite guilt, something older, something that had hardened around itself, calcified into a shape she had learned to live around, like a body grows tissue over a wound that was never properly treated. She didn't try to deny it. I think in that moment she knew there was nothing left to deny. His father and I, she stopped, started again. Before I married your father, before everything, there was a man. We were young. Things happened the way things happen when you are young and foolish and not yet who you intend to become. The room was absolutely silent. I didn't know I was pregnant when I married your father. I convinced myself that it was your father's child. I wanted it to be. I gave the baby up. I told no one. Your father never knew. I never spoke of it again. Kelechi stood up from the table. He didn't shout. He didn't break anything. He just stood, quietly, and in standing seemed to fill the room with something heavier than anger, the specific weight of a man processing the distance between who he believed his mother to be and who she actually was. You have a son, he said. I have a brother, and you never... half-brother, she said. As if the fraction made it smaller, as if halving the word could halve the truth. You spent 3 years, Kelechi said, his voice very quiet, very controlled. You spent 3 years telling my wife a liar, 3 years telling everyone who would listen that she was hiding something, that my son wasn't mine, that she couldn't be trusted. He paused. You did all of that while carrying this. She opened her mouth. Don't. Soft. Final. Not right now. He took my hand. He lifted Obina from the chair beside me, and he walked out of that house without looking back. I followed him. I didn't look back either. But as the door closed behind us, I heard her begin to cry. And it was the first time in 3 years, the first time that I felt something close to sorry for her. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but something, a recognition that whatever she had done to me, she was now sitting alone inside it. Kelechi didn't speak to his mother for 11 days. Those 11 days were strange in our apartment. Not peaceful, just empty. The accusations were gone, yes, but so was something else I didn't expect to lose. The low-grade noise of waiting for the next thing. 3 years of bracing had become a habit I didn't know I had until it stopped. Kelechi wasn't angry at me. If anything, he was quieter with me in the way people go quiet when they are ashamed of something they cannot undo. He knew it. He didn't say so, but I knew it by the way he made my tea without being asked, by the way he looked at Obina with an expression that was something close to prayer. I let him sit with it. I had learned in 3 years of marriage which silences to fill and which ones to leave alone. The family was in chaos, the way families always are when a stone has been thrown into still water and the ripples are still moving outward. Babatunde called twice. 2 of the aunts split into camps, one with Mama Chidima for loyalty, one against her for old wounds of their own. And somewhere in Lagos, a 41-year-old civil engineer named Rotimi Adeyemi Koke was living his life without knowing any of this had happened. Kelechi found him on the 14th day. It wasn't difficult. The lab had shared contact details as part of the anomaly notification. There were consent protocols involved that I didn't fully understand, but Kelechi navigated them carefully. He sent a message through a mutual contact first, measured and unhurried, not wanting to arrive in a stranger's life like a disaster. Rotimi was 41 years old, a civil engineer based in Abuja. He had been adopted as an infant in a family in Port Harcourt and had known his entire life that he was adopted. His parents had never hidden it from him, had in fact made it a point of gentle pride. He had done the DNA test 18 months earlier as part of a quiet, private search for his biological origins. He had not expected to find a brother, but he had hoped for one, he told Kelechi. He had hoped. Those 3 words stayed with me when Kelechi came home and told me about their first phone call. A man who had built his whole life around honesty about who he was, adopted, searching, unashamed of not knowing, had been carrying a quiet hope that somewhere out there was someone who shared his blood, while the woman who gave birth to him had spent 30 years making sure no one would ever know he existed. The contrast was not lost on me. It is still not lost on me. Kelechi came home on the 12th day from his mother's house. He sat down at the kitchen table and told me she had cried, that she was sorry, that she wanted to come and see us, see Obina, make things right. He watched my face carefully when he said it. He had learned over 3 years to watch my face. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "Whatever you decide, I'll support it." I looked at him for a long time, at this man who had sometimes believed her, not all the way, not openly, but in the small moments when it mattered, in the silences where a word from him would have been enough and the word didn't come. "I want to move," I said. He blinked. "What?" "Not across Lagos, out of Lagos. Port Harcourt, Abuja, anywhere." I kept my voice even. "I have spent 3 years inside her reach. I don't want to spend 3 more watching to see how she rebuilds herself inside this secret and decides what to do with it next. Adana." She didn't stop, Kelechi, until she had no choice. You know she would have kept going. He was quiet for a long time. The evening generator for our street groaned on outside, the kind of sound that in Lagos marks the end of things. "You are right," he finally said, quietly, like the words cost him something. They did cost him. I knew that. Kelechi had grown up in Lagos. His father was buried in Lagos. His memories, his people, his whole sense of home were woven into this city. Leaving was not a small thing for him, but I was also done paying for things that were not my fault. 3 years of swallowing my responses, managing my expression, preserving a peace that was never actually peace. I had paid in full. I did not owe more. He had turned down a job offer in Abuja 2 times before. This time, he called them back. Before we left, I did something I had never done in 3 years of marriage. I made a phone call. I called Auntie Yemi, Mama Chidima's younger sister, the one who had always been kind to me in the careful, tentative way of someone who disagrees with a more powerful person but has never found the courage to say it out loud. Auntie, I want you to know that we are leaving, and I want you to know why. I told her everything, not just the dining table. She already knew about that. I told her about the 3 years before it, the whispers, the church women, the smile on Mama Chidima's face when she slid that envelope across the table, the smile of a woman who has been building towards a conclusion for a long time and believes she has finally arrived.
Auntie Yemi was quiet for most of it. When I finished, she said, "I knew. I didn't do enough. I'm sorry, my daughter." "I know you knew," I said. "I'm not calling to make you feel guilty. I'm calling because someone in that family should hold the full truth, not just the vision she tells from now on." There was a long pause. "She will say you turned Kelechi against her," Auntie Yemi said. "She will," I agreed. "Let her. The people who love us will know the truth. The rest don't matter to me anymore." I hung up. It was the first time in 3 years I had said exactly what I meant to someone in that family. No softening, no careful management of someone else's feelings at the cost of my own, no quiet performance of a peace that did not exist. It felt like putting down something very heavy that I had been carrying so long I had forgotten it wasn't part of me. Rotimi came to visit us in Abuja 6 weeks after we arrived. He was a quiet man, careful with his words in the way that people are careful when they have spent a lifetime arriving in rooms where they were not expected, learning to take up space slowly, to let trust build before they lean on it. He and Kelechi sat in our living room for hours that first evening, talking of nothing in particular, football, traffic, the specific frustrations of Abuja roads, and I watched the two of them find each other, the way you find your footing on unfamiliar ground, carefully, one step at a time, testing the surface before you commit your weight. Obina climbed onto Rotimi's lap within the first 20 minutes, fell asleep there. Rotimi looked down at him with an expression I recognized immediately. I had seen it once before in a delivery room on Kelechi's face. That specific combination of wonder and something close to terror that children produce in people who are only beginning to understand what family means. Mama Chidima did not know Rotimi was in Abuja. She had reached out to him once through Kelechi, a halting message full of qualifications and careful conditions. Rotimi had read it, sat with it for several days, and told Kelechi, not yet. Maybe someday, but not yet. On his terms, not hers. Meanwhile, she was in Lagos, in the house she had always ruled, surrounded by the family that now knew her secret and was quietly rearranging itself around that knowledge. The aunts who had listened to her concerns about me were now whispering to each other about her. The church women who had clucked sympathetically about her difficult daughter-in-law were now clucking about something else entirely. She had built her power on being the keeper of other people's stories, on being the one who knew, who exposed, who named, the woman who could walk into a room and shift the temperature of it simply by deciding what she would say and to whom. Now she was the story. I will not pretend this didn't matter. It did. But I also won't pretend it felt like triumph, because it didn't. Watching even someone who has hurt you sit inside the consequences of their own choices is not a clean feeling. It is complicated and exhausting and carries its own kind of grief. What I felt mostly was tired and grateful and very, very far from that dining table. Obina is 5 now. He is loud and fearless and asks questions that stop adults cold. He does not know yet what was done in his name, or what it cost, or what it uncovered. Someday I will tell him, carefully, the way you hand a child something fragile and teach them how to hold it without dropping it. People ask me sometimes when I tell this story to close friends or to women who are living their own versions of it, do I miss Lagos? Do I regret leaving? Was I too hard on her? I think about that question more than I expected to. I think about the woman she must have been at 20-something, pregnant, afraid, making a decision she would carry silently for 30 decades. I think about how long that silence lives inside a person and what it does to the shape of a person. I think she loved Kelechi ferociously, genuinely, in the way that people love the things they have sacrificed everything to protect. But love that has cuddled into control is not the same thing as love. And 3 years of being systematically dismantled by someone who claimed to be protecting her son is not something I am willing to minimize. Not for her comfort, not for the family's comfort, not for anyone's. She came to that dining table with an envelope she believed was a weapon. She thought she was finally going to expose me, prove to everyone that she had been right all along, reclaim her son from the woman she was convinced had stolen him. What she did instead was hand me the exit I had been too loyal, too patient, too afraid to take on my own. The DNA test she demanded was supposed to destroy my family. Instead, it destroyed the version of my life where I stayed small to keep a peace that was never peace, where I smiled at a woman who was sharpening something behind her smile, where I confused endurance with winning. They are not the same thing. And now we are in Abuja. Kelechi works at a firm he likes, Rotimi comes to dinner sometimes and sits at a table where no one questions whether he belongs. Obinna is growing up in a house where no one is whispering. The truth in the end does not take sides. It simply arrives. And it is the life you have been quietly, stubbornly, faithfully building, the one you refuse to abandon, even when someone was doing their best to make you believe it was built on lies, that decides what happens when the truth gets there. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Stories by Abby. New stories drop every week. And leave a comment. Have you ever watched someone else's secret completely change your life? Tell me below. I read every single one.